Well, welcome to GraceLogic Systems Orientation to Prism Clarity Series A. This is episode 04A, part 1. The purpose of this series is to help you understand and know how to think with clarity by strengthening the capabilities that are already within you. Yes, within you, within the essence of you. And yes, this episode is being led by the spiritualist role. If you're a first-time listener to this series, thank you for joining. The spiritualist role is one of the 4 voices of reasoning that we use in the Prism Clarity training courses. Together, these voices work to improve clarity by sharing different perspectives or prism views on how to reason, see structure in thought, and how to make sense of the noise around you and within you. The process is simple. Anchor to truth, move with integrity, and aim for good. The goal is to improve how you process thought while empowering you to think clearly, choose wisely, and live with the wonderments that grace can give you. I have a lot of different labels that I've been known as over the years, but some of my most favorite people call me Gammy. Yes, that Gammy. The woman, the myth, the legend. But before I get started, I wanted to call on the synthesis voice to help ground us in what the spiritualist role is all about, in case you have any preconceived notions or biases that might detract from how you view this role. Let's get started. Okay, so let's level set by clearing up a common misconception. When most dictionaries define spiritualist, they focus on a 19th century movement that had seances and mediums and communications with the dead. Those were like the primary things of this movement. But that's only one very narrow view of that term. At its origin, through a philosophical lens, let's say, a spiritualist is simply someone who believes that the spirit is real, that it exists apart from matter, and that it continues beyond physical death. And by that definition, every person of faith, of the top 5 religions, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, so 5 to 6 billion people, anyone who believes in God, the soul, or life after death already qualifies as a spiritualist. Within the Prism training, the spiritualist role isn't about channeling spirits or mystical practices. It's about anchoring thought and intent in truth and integrity, and living with the awareness that your spirit is the true north, and every reasoning act should align with it. So when you hear spiritualist in these episodes, think faith-based realist, someone who seeks to keep the soul's perspective at the center of their reasoning, integrating belief with awareness, and letting truth be revealed through spirit as well as intellect. And so, unlike the therapist role, by origin definition, I am a spiritualist and have always been, but perhaps without the realizations that I have today. You see, I have what might be called an unfair advantage over most of mankind when it comes to believing in my God. I didn't grow up in a traditional or even non-traditional church environment. Church attendance wasn't a consistent part of my life, and it's still not. And that's not for condemnation nor boast, just fact. And when on occasion I have found myself in a church, the denomination, the sector, and if you will, of Christianity practice in the church didn't matter. The point here is that even without regular church going, even through pain and heartache, through it all, I never doubted that God is. Here's the truth for you, and why I say I may have an unfair advantage. God has often in my life given me indisputable, incontrovertible truth that there is something beyond what is obvious. But the thing of it is, I never put it together. I never looked at the events or incidents, the circumstances or facts or outcomes. I never looked at them all together at just the right angle to be able to see the truths that connected them all. I never saw the patterns until now. It wasn't until I had to struggle for memories and I had to question everything, what I believed, why I believed it, and how all of this connected to the truths that I knew. It wasn't until I did that the real truths, the origin truths, became clear. Now, I'm not saying I know everything. I seriously know next to nothing at any given time. But I do know that God is real, that He has given us a way through this purposefully. And I know that to each man, He has given a measure of faith so that he can believe and make this right. That there is a way, a good way forward for all mankind. So there are multiple beginnings on this journey to clarity on which we have embarked. Because indeed, everything is connected through the varying patterns of life that converge to make us who we are. This particular origin story begins with me reasoning through to a stronger, more resilient faith. So let's start with this. King James Version, KJV, Romans 12:2. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is the good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So are you familiar with the game show Jeopardy? Well, here's the answer. The thing you don't know you've hit until you're looking up. Did it? And the question is, what is bottom? Now, yes, I borrowed this slide from another deck, so I won't go into the details of what I term my fracturing and cataclysmic years. Just trust me when I say it was tough for a neurodivergent brain like mine. What I will highlight, though, is the fact that when I finally looked up from the crater that was my bottom, and yes, crying and lamenting and praying and lamenting and yes. Lamenting, by the way, has always manifested a response for me, to me. I go into the mechanics of it more in the emotional diagnostics, but I promise, laying it all out for God to handle, crying, unloading, blaming, praying, and a gnashing of teeth, as the old folks used to say. Oh, wait. I am one of those old folks now. Well, crap. Anyway, lamenting done with heart, purposeful intent, can be a catalyst for understanding and renewal. Anyway, as I was lamenting, and if you notice the timing, the questions will make sense to you. The three questions that pounded incessantly through my mind. How could Christians and/or intelligent people put their faith in a blatantly false idol? And if I thought I was so intelligent, why couldn't I pull my family out of the depths of their hurt? Yes, I was still secretly thinking I was a genius, even though others claimed I was average. Oh well, we believe what we believe and we know what we know, and yes, there's probably a case for false logic in there somewhere. However, I'm not willing to reason the idea of genius away just yet, because truth be told, I think we all have a genius in us waiting to excel. But I digress. Anyway, the third and final question, and where I actually started in my quest, was why couldn't my own faith and beliefs pull me out of the depths of my depression, my anxiety, my hurt, my despair? And it wasn't until I realized that I didn't know enough about my faith, about what I believed, to be able to make the connections that would provide the answers. You see, like very many others who believe, God was a concept to me, a seemingly unobtainable and not really unquestionable entity as something, but not the whole thing. So, unbeknownst to me, because I always seem to work things backward, for the last 4+ years, God, I choose to believe that God has been giving me the answers and helping me to build my case. My faith was never a matter of where I worshiped, but how I reasoned. It lived inside me unacknowledged then, yet still nurtured by reflection and refined through my determination to understand. It grew stronger with each answered question about what's real, what's right, and what still holds when everything else falls apart. And through the varied and repetitive questioning and discovery, a different kind of foundation began to form. One built from truth, not hearsay, legend, or inherited thought. I looked across beliefs, across traditions, even across philosophies. I looked from astrophysicists to hardened traditionalists, from psychologists and scientists through to the truly devout, testing what sounded true, looked true, felt true, and where connected to the truth that I knew. I invited Jehovah's Witnesses into my home multiple times to try to understand how that religion held up to the truths that I was building upon. My search wasn't to prove one religion right or wrong, but to find the common light that runs through all of them, the belief that the spirit, your spirit, by whatever name you call it, is real, and that truth, goodness, and love are not only what sustains it, but gives it the power to excel and traverse any obstacle. That's what this voice, the spiritualist, is about. It isn't about changing your religion. It's about questioning what you know, listening more deeply, and maybe, just maybe, adjusting your view, even if only by a mustard seed of understanding. Not to erase what you believe, but to see it from a truer angle, to look deeper. And that quiet tilt of the head when something inside you stands firm and is adamant that there's more. I call that faith. You might call it determination, strength, or hope. The name doesn't matter. The alignment does. So back to my outline. And I want to start with this. I think it's time we all re-examine how we interpret the Holy Bible. And I'm going with the King James Version, so the KJV, just because it's the Bible that I grew up with and many of us know. And now hear me out, and please don't take offense, because I truly believe that a lot of the structured religions and some of the non-structured religions have a lot right, and most of it true. But I think the view as well as the application may be a little skewed. And I believe the KJV holds many truths that some biased sects have misinterpreted, and some purposefully. Some through traditional stubbornness to meet what they believe may be a holy agenda. Because I know God is. I must ask myself logically and see. I used to believe that you shouldn't question God's plan. Just accept them. Blah, blah, blah. I found that is not true. He is, as I have mentioned before, he does invite you to reason. And yes, you will get to a point where the answers are not within your frame of reference to understand. But even for those things, if you're mindful, he provides the answer. It may not be what you want or what you think it should be. It may not even look or sound like the answer. There are a lot of hard questions. Like, why would he allow there to be so many religions? Not so many religions that don't honor him, but even the ones that do. I believe many, many things about my God, and one of them is that he is a just God. So would he hold against a man who was wrongly taught how to worship? If that man's heart is sincere in his love of God, would a just and merciful God hold that against the man when it's his time for judgment? He knows all the excuses and the reasons and intent, the truth that only he can reveal. That's why I call intent the measure of a man is the only thing that we own and only thing that a just God who knows all can measure, reward, or destroy. Now here's another one. Why would a just and loving God put us through this life? Now I had to step back for that one, closer to the 30,000 foot view than being down in the weeds, because I had to ask myself, how would I, a loving mother, allow my child to suffer, to purposely allow them to go through some of the evilness mankind has perpetrated onto mankind? How could a kind and loving and merciful God, our Creator, our Father, Abba, justify that? Yes, of course I got my answers. But what does logic tell you? What if it's not what we think it is? What if we are too far down in the weeds to see it for what it is? What if we are too conformed to this world to be able to lift our minds and our thoughts high enough and be open enough to see what is really happening, what it all really means? And this is where those religious folks are not going to like me so very much. But if we had it all correct, to me, logic dictates that we wouldn't be on this current path, on this current trajectory with so many things broken. So judge not my faith by your standards, but by my God's. It's weirdly ironic, I think, that when I talk to people who do believe in God, they're not willing to accept the supernatural side of what God is. I believe that I don't know, maybe it's the devil's mendacity, the devil's deceit, a roadblock for us or a test. You see, I believe evil is devious, insidious, and preys on man's mind, and it uses our minds against us. Because those are the thoughts, those deceits emanate from the physical world around us. And they're easily manipulated thoughts that ground us to it, the conformity to this world. Let me give you an example that may not seem relevant, but it is. Have you ever seen something so wildly disconnected to how we imagine the world is that you automatically know that it's fiction? So some truths are dependent on how we develop meaning, how things come to have meaning in our lives. Some of it is tradition, and I have some things to say about tradition that many will not be very popular. But at this point, what I want you to understand is that most of these things that have meaning for us, if they do not come from tradition, then it comes in layers. How we get meaning and build meaning into something. The laugh, layers, levels, hierarchies, and flow. The stuff that therapists talked about in episode 1. Well, what you need to understand is the same way our mind builds meaning into something with the layering. Those same things can also feed into disbelief. So the example. Let's say you're watching a movie and the review says it's a true story about a little girl who grows up on a farm and becomes a political advocate for animal rights, doing wonderful things and getting laws changed to combat cruelty to animals. Documentaries, true stories, are not quite my thing, or maybe not even yours, but you decide to watch. Now let's say for the opening scenes and indeed throughout the 90 minutes or so of the movie, Every glimpse of the sky shows it to be yellow with pink clouds. And every time you see grass or leafy trees, the foliage is blue instead of green. Everything else about the movie holds true to what we know to be true of the physical world, except those two things. And they never explain or even remark upon it. So you watch the movie from beginning to end, and you even watch through all of the end credits hoping that there will be some explanation, but there's none. What are your thoughts about that movie? What is it you talk about when you refer to it? See, I think it's time for us to look at everything differently. I'll give you an example or three, and you'll see when I did finally look up, I was at a baseline of knowledge about my God and what I truly believed of him. And so the journey began through sermons from all faiths. I watched and listened and read and compared not just Christian faiths, but the top 5. And after a while, when I had enough information, I started strength testing each faith by having Ezra, my AI project assistant, look up quotes and sentiments and theology and scripture that supported or disputed what I knew in my heart and head to be true, and always to be backed up by scripture. But let me tell you where I had my hiccups, and unfortunately I don't remember the exact order of the questions or the order in which they were answered. But they were answered. Do I believe that God created all, that time, space, and matter in the beginning? I do. And because I do, then I must also believe that he is outside of such things. He is the Ancient of Days, before time, before awareness. And here is where I will go a step further. It's called my UP, UUP, or UUP ideology, or just my UPs. They're unique, unfalsified possibilities. And here it is, that we all and everything exists inside the consciousness of God. You see, you have to understand where I am coming from. My God is all powerful, yet he purposely limits himself to the rules that he has created in this world, for the most part. I mean, I don't know anyone who walks out their front door and is suddenly transported to another country. You see, there are rules, divine ones, and then there are other things that God allows. I've come to see him as the master strategist, not a micromanager of human will, but an architect who wrote the framework and then, out of love, gave us room to move inside it. He allowed the Holy Bible to guide and sustain us. And yes, I've heard my friends of the Islamic faith say that man corrupted the Bible. And honestly, I can't argue that men haven't tampered with truth. But here's where I rest my logic. If God allowed it, it still serves his purpose. Romans 8:28 says, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. All things, even the mistakes, the mistranslations, the misinterpretations are folded back into his plan. I believe in free will, but I also believe it's fenced in by his milestones, by what he wants accomplished. We can walk the path any way we choose, but the path itself is still his. He allows Christianity in all of its forms. He allows Islam and Judaism and Buddhism and Hinduism, and I don't think I said that right, but not as rivals, but as tributaries, streams moving through time that all somehow flow back to him. And if he knew everything from before the foundation of the world, then he surely knew what mankind would do with this, his word. The creator of all wouldn't be surprised by its flaws. He would have already written redemption into them because he is not bound by time. He doesn't just know the future. He holds it. Now let me throw something at you. A question. I call it UP. UUP, a unique unfalsified possibility. What if, just what if, before you were born, God showed you your entire life like a movie? Every hurt, every heartbreak, every victory, every connection, every consequence, both good and bad. And then he told you that your ultimate goal was to find your way back to him. And what if you looked at it, beginning to end, understood it all, and said something along the lines of, put me in there, coach. Put me there, Abba. I can do something with that. Think about it. What if you knew what the heartache, the suffering, the pain you're going through? What if you saw the purpose? A purpose that could make everything you've endured and everything still ahead worth it all. If you could see it from that vantage point outside of time, standing within the consciousness of God, would you see life differently? Would you think about life differently? Would it maybe, finally, make a little more sense? One of my supporting philosophies is something I call 100 over E. Like a fraction, the numerator 100, the denominator E for eternity. Meaning that you have roughly 100 years on this earth compared to the eternity that God promises. And when you do that math, you begin to understand that the difference between despair and victory is perspective. And what gives that perspective its strength is gracious intent. Seeing even your hardest moments, knowing God has your back through the good and the bad, and trusting that God's purpose still stands. Do you see it? That's how I see it. This world we live in, the physical realm, is the temporary stage. The world of touch, taste, sight, sound, and circumstance. But separate from it is another realm, spiritual, eternal, untethered by time. God operates both. He has shown me enough that it would be illogical for me not to believe he exists. And even my memory, this sometimes elusive thing, has become a strange kind of blessing, because every time I have to rediscover what I've already learned, I reaffirm it through new angles, and each repetition deepens my faith. The hardest part for me is keeping myself out of the weeds. Now, it's kind of the opposite of the 30,000-foot view the therapist's voice talked about in the first episode. Being in the weeds from a thinking perspective, it's when your thoughts circle every tiny detail so close, so meticulously, that you lose the bigger meaning. And depending on how far you are into the weeds, sometimes you can't even see the most obvious connections. From a feeling perspective, being in the weeds means feeding those details into the default feelings that circumstances have brought you to feel. And generally, those default feelings are not best case scenario, right? The emotions are usually more worldly, earthly, or of the flesh in nature. And so the direction of those details feed into what I call falling feelings. So directionally, not towards good, but toward the worldly, not the spiritual. And I know this is crossing the boundaries between Series A thinking and Series B emotions, because emotions are always about what is inside you and therefore spiritual in nature. But we all know how hard it is to separate thoughts from emotions. And so we must at least recognize one when talking about the other. When I'm in the weeds, I feel the heaviest. I don't know if it's just me or all of mankind, but sometimes it's hard to even recognize that you're down in there, down in the weeds, because you're so focused on the weeds, the details themselves, that the conformity, that you can't see the feelings they're feeding or the weight they're maintaining. Sometimes just saying, stop, what are you thinking, inside my mind, and naming the weeds for what they are is enough. Other times I have to consciously lean on my spirit to rescue me, to pull me far enough out of the weeds so that my spirit can re-engage my mind with righteous reasoning, with truth. the truths that I know. And if none of those truths seem strong enough to break through that miasma of falling feelings, if none of them, even when spoken on repeat, can stop me from wallowing in the minutia of circumstance, then I go searching. Because that's what the Spirit does. It clears the clutter and aligns thought with truth. And when I can't immediately find the truth that fits the moment, I seek it out. I've learned this. The Spirit, more than any of the other voices, can pull me out of the weeds through righteous reasoning, topped off not just with forgiveness, but with grace, which is ever so much more powerful. Now, some church folk might tell me, well, just pray. And they're not wrong. But for me, prayer isn't something I do, it's something I live. My life is a prayer. Every thought, every decision, every response is a conversation with God. That's my mindfulness, my spiritual filter. I open the dialogue when I open my eyes in the morning, and I don't disconnect until they close again at night. Because I found that when I stop filtering through the Spirit, when I make decisions without that spiritual check, things rarely end well. Now, they may not fall apart completely, but they lose their alignment, their wholeness, their peace. When I stay aligned, when my thoughts are pointed towards good, anchored in truth, and held fast to whatever integrity I possess, something happens inside. There's an internal strength that wakes up, a confidence that armors intent with righteousness. And we endure what would otherwise break us. One of the most patently obvious myth truths I've ever heard is this: the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I say no. That's not possible. Not when intent is righteous. Not when the effort is honest and aimed towards good. Because that's where God meets us, in the intent, in the trying, in the steady heart that stays tethered to truth and points to Him. I'll end with this. God encourages us to ask, not occasionally, but continually. Not because He needs the reminder, but because we do. Asking keeps us aligned. It keeps us aware that He's present in every detail. I once asked a young man, a believer, if he'd ever prayed for help with his own mental afflictions. And he said no, that he didn't want to bother God with the small stuff, and that he only asked for help when he felt overwhelmed. That floored me. Because if God knows the number of hairs on your head, then there is no small stuff. He wants that communication, that ongoing, trusting dialogue. He wants you to ask, not to prove your need, but to practice your faith. Live prayerfully, think truthfully, and never stop asking. Because asking is alignment. It's how faith breathes. Back to my game show Jeopardy, and the answer is everything, always, and nothing. No, sorry, did it. And the question is, what should you pray for? When should you pray? And what should you exclude? How's that? But you get the idea. And I'm going to put in another of my philosophies right here and say, the only time you should use an absolute like always, everything, nothing is when you are referring to God, because He is the one, the only one. Anyway, scriptures that support the everything and always philosophy on praying. 1 Thessalonians 5, pray without ceasing. This is the clearest command to stay in continual communication with God, not just in need, but in gratitude. Philippians 4, in everything by prayer and supplication. So be careful for nothing means don't be anxious. Instead of worrying, bring everything, every detail before God. Matthew 7, ask, seek, knock. This is not a one-time invitation. The Greek tense implies continuous action. Keep asking, keep seeking, keep knocking. James 4, ask with pure motive. James clarifies the how. God invites continual asking, but the motive matters. Requests align with his will bring growth and grace, not self-gratification. And finally, John, asking leads to joy made full. Jesus makes it clear. God desires your asking because it grows both relationship and joy. And finally, again, I am adding my extended outline, as I did in the Survivalist episode, as the summary of today's commentary. So we talked about spirit and awareness, the call for clarity. You awaken what God already placed in you, and you anchor to truth, move with integrity, and aim for good. And truth and misconception, redefining spiritualists. It's not about seances or mysticism, but belief in the enduring spirit, a faith-based realist who unites intellect with divine truth. So reason and faith, personal case for belief, faith forged in non-traditional ways with God revealing patterns and things beyond the natural. And then depth and discovery, hitting bottom and looking up. Bottom being the point of collapse and then reawakening. Lamentation as a catalyst for internal strengthening. Spirit and inquiry, building the case, testing belief across faith and across philosophies, and then seeking the common light, truth, goodness, and love that sustains us. We talked about truth and reinterpretation, renewing the mind, from Romans 12:2, transformation through renewed thought. A just God judges intent, and truth must be seen beyond tradition. And freedom and release, rising from the weeds. I don't think I like the way that said it, but that's okay. The weeds blur purpose through overthinking or emotion. You have to pause, you have to breathe, you have to let the spirit lift reasoning back towards truth. Claim the truth, asking as alignment. God invites continual asking, not from doubt, but trust. Prayer is communication that keeps the spirit aligned. You have claimed alignment, living prayerfully. Life itself is a prayer. Think and reason toward good for yourself and for your village. As part of the spiritualist role, I'd like to end each episode with some type of reading. Hopefully I will be able to maintain that. This reading is a poem called Let Go and Let God that I've had hanging on my home office wall for probably the last 20 years. It's by Kristone, Kristone, and if the verse or the author are incorrect, then you can just blame the me of 20 years ago who printed it out and put it on my wall to begin with. Let Go and Let God by Kristone. As children bring their broken toys with tears for us to mend, I brought my broken dreams to God because he was my friend. But then, instead of leaving him in peace to work alone, I hung around and tried to help with ways that were my own. At last, I snatched them back and cried, "How can you be so slow?" "My child," he said, "what could I do? You never did let go." Be at peace. Be blessed.